Dean Martin was halfway through That's Amore when he stopped singing. Not because he forgot the words, not because his voice failed. He stopped because he saw something at the back of the Copa room that would force him to make a choice, one that could end his Vegas career forever. Dean Martin was halfway through That's Amore when he stopped singing. Not because he forgot the words. Dean never forgot the words. Not because his voice failed. His voice was smooth as whiskey, the way it always was. He stopped because he saw something happening at the back of the Copa room that made him realize he had a choice to make. A choice between the career he'd built and the man he wanted to be. The band kept playing for 3 more bars before trailing off into confused silence. Ken Lane's fingers hovered over the piano keys. The drummer held his sticks frozen in midair. The trumpet player looked around, wondering if this was some kind of bit, some new joke Dean was trying out. But Dean Martin never stopped mid-song. Never. In 5 years of performing together, Ken had never seen Dean do anything like this. 2,400 people looked at each other, uncertain. Conversations died mid-sentence. Cocktail glasses paused halfway to lips. The usual soundtrack of Vegas. The clinking of ice, the murmur of small talk, the rustle of silk and taffeta. All of it evaporated into nothing. The Copa Room, one of the most famous entertainment venues in the world, went completely silent. Dean stood at center stage, microphone in hand, staring toward the rear exit. His expression had changed. The easy smile, the relaxed charm that made him the king of cool, it was gone. In its place was something harder, something determined. His jaw was set. His eyes were locked on 2 security guards in Sands uniforms who were escorting an older black man toward the door. The man wasn't resisting. He wasn't making a scene or causing trouble. He was just leaving quietly, the way he'd probably left 100 rooms before. His head was slightly bowed. His shoulders were curved inward. He moved with the practiced resignation of someone who knew exactly how this worked, who'd learned long ago that fighting back only made things worse. He was almost to the exit now, almost gone, almost invisible again. And Dean Martin, the man who never let anything ruin a show, the performer who could charm his way through any situation, the guy who always kept it light. Dean made a decision. Right there on stage in front of 2,400 people, with his career and his reputation hanging in the balance, he decided he was done staying silent. He decided that some things mattered more than finishing a song. Some things mattered more than keeping the crowd happy. Some things mattered more than following the rules everyone pretended didn't exist. What happened next would either end his career in Las Vegas or change it forever. To understand what Dean was risking, you need to understand Las Vegas in 1962. Las Vegas in 1962 wasn't the family-friendly tourist destination it would become decades later. It was a playground for adults with money, for high rollers and celebrities, for people who wanted to escape the rules of normal life. But Vegas had its own rules, rules that everyone understood but nobody talked about openly. The glittering hotels along the Strip, the Sands, the Flamingo, the Tropicana, they all had one thing in common. They were segregated, not officially. There were no signs that said whites only. Nevada didn't work that way. The law didn't require it. But the practice was clear as day, and everyone involved knew exactly how things worked. Black performers could headline shows. They could sing on stage to packed houses of 2,000 people. They could get standing ovations and encore after encore. But when the show was over, they couldn't eat in the hotel restaurants. They couldn't stay in the rooms upstairs. They couldn't gamble in the casinos. They couldn't even sit at the bar and order a drink. When the final curtain came down, they left through the back entrance and drove across town to the west side, the part of Las Vegas where black people were allowed to live. Sammy Davis Jr. performed regularly at the Sands. So did Nat King Cole. So did Lena Horne. They were stars, massive stars. They drew crowds that filled every seat in the house. Their names went up on the marquee in lights 20 feet tall. People paid top dollar to see them perform. But the moment they walked off that stage, they became invisible. The casino owners wanted black talent. They just didn't want black customers. They wanted the entertainment without the equality. It was a system built on hypocrisy, and everyone involved knew it. Performers knew it, audiences knew it, management knew it. And if you wanted to work in Las Vegas, if you wanted to play the best rooms and make the best money, you followed the rules. Period. You didn't make waves, you didn't challenge the system. You smiled for the cameras, you cashed your checks, and you kept your mouth shut. Because speaking up meant losing everything. Your bookings would dry up. Your phone would stop ringing. You'd be labeled as difficult, as someone who caused problems. In an industry built on relationships and reputation, that was a death sentence. So people stayed quiet. They swallowed their anger. They accepted the indignity. They told themselves it was just the way things were, that you couldn't fight the system, that survival meant knowing your place and staying in it. But there was one member of the Rat Pack who had personal reasons to hate these rules more than most. Dean Martin understood prejudice. In a way, most entertainers in Las Vegas didn't. He'd grown up in Steubenville, Ohio, the son of Italian immigrants. His father, Gaetano Crosetti, had been a barber who faced discrimination for being Italian, for having an accent, for being different in a town that didn't like different. Dean remembered what that felt like. He remembered being called Dago as a kid. He remembered the way people looked at his father, the way they talked slower and louder as if his father was stupid just because English was his second language. He remembered watching his father work twice as hard as anyone else just to be accepted, just to be seen as legitimate. He remembered the quiet rage his father kept locked inside, the way it would show sometimes in the tightness around his eyes, in the set of his jaw when someone treated him like he was less than human. That background gave Dean something rare in the entertainment world of 1962, a genuine understanding of what it meant to be on the outside looking in, to be judged not for who you were, but for what you were, to be talented and hardworking and still have doors slammed in your face because of something you couldn't control. His friendship with Sammy Davis Jr. wasn't just professional, it was real, deep. Sammy stayed at Dean's house when he came through Los Angeles. They'd sit up late into the night talking about race, about prejudice, about the absurdity of the Vegas rules. Sammy could perform for 2 hours to a standing ovation and then get escorted out the back door like he was nobody. Dean hated that, hated watching it happen, hated being part of a system that treated his friend that way. But Dean had mouths to feed, a wife, kids, people who depended on him. He had a career to protect, so he played the game. He performed at the segregated hotels. He smiled for the cameras. He signed the contracts. He kept quiet, just like everyone else. By 1962, though, Dean Martin was big enough that he didn't have to stay quiet anymore. He was a genuine star, one of the biggest names in Vegas. He had leverage. He had power. And on September 12, 1962, he was about to use it. September 12, 1962, 7:30 in the evening. Dean arrived at the Sands for his evening show. He was in his dressing room, adjusting his bow tie in the mirror, going through his usual pre-show routine. In 90 minutes, he'd be on stage. Right now, he was just trying to get his head in the game. His assistant, Jackie Romano, came in. Jackie looked uncomfortable, the way people look when they have to deliver bad news they don't want to be delivering. "Dean, there's a situation." Dean didn't look up from the mirror. "What kind of situation?" "Security's removing someone from backstage. Older guy. He was just sitting near the loading dock, not bothering anyone." Dean turned around. Something in Jackie's voice told him this wasn't routine. "So why are they removing him?" Jackie hesitated. He knew how Dean felt about certain things. "He's a Negro, Dean. Management says he doesn't have clearance to be back here." Dean walked out of his dressing room without another word. He went down the hall toward the loading area, his dress shoes clicking on the polished floor. 2 security guards in Sands uniforms were standing with an older black man, maybe 70 years old, wearing a worn but clean suit. The man wasn't arguing. He wasn't pleading. He was just nodding, accepting whatever they were telling him, ready to leave. "What's going on?" Dean asked. One of the guards turned. "Mr. Martin, nothing to worry about, just removing someone who shouldn't be here." Dean looked at the older man, really looked at him. "Who are you?" The man met his eyes. There was dignity there, quiet and unshakable. "Willie Hayes, sir. I used to play piano here at T. Sands back in '52 when it first opened. Just wanted to see the old place again." "He doesn't have a ticket," the guard said. His voice was matter-of-fact, like he was explaining a simple rule to a child. "House rules, Mr. Martin. You know how it is." Dean knew exactly how it was. He'd known for years. He looked at Willie Hayes, at the resignation in the man's eyes, at the way he stood there accepting it like he'd accepted it 1,000 times before. Dean felt something tighten in his chest. Let him stay backstage. "He's not hurting anyone." The guard's expression didn't change. "You can't do that, Mr. Martin. You know the policy." Dean knew the policy. He'd watched it enforced 100 times. "How long until showtime?" 20 minutes, Jackie said quietly. Dean nodded slowly. He wanted to say more, wanted to argue, but the guards were already walking Willie toward the exit, and Dean had a show to do. He watched them go. Then he turned back toward his dressing room, but something had shifted inside him, something he couldn't ignore anymore. Dean went on stage at 8 o'clock sharp. The Copa room was packed, 2,400 people dressed to the nines ready for a show. The lights came up, the band struck the opening notes. Dean walked out to thunderous applause, microphone in hand, that famous smile on his face. From the audience's perspective, everything was normal. Dean Martin, smooth as always, ready to entertain, but Dean was performing on autopilot. His mind was somewhere else. He was halfway through That's Amore when he saw Willie Hayes again. The security guards were walking him through the Copa room, not through the backstage corridor where no one would see, through the audience area, past the tables, past the bar, making a statement, making sure everyone backstage understood what happened when you didn't follow the rules. The audience didn't notice. Hey were laughing, drinking, enjoying the show. But Dean noticed. And Ken Lane noticed the way Dean's voice had gone flat, the way his eyes had stopped focusing on the crowd. Dean sang the next verse without thinking about it. His eyes followed Willie as the guards steered him past the side tables, past the back booths, toward the rear doors. Willie kept his head down, trying to be invisible the way he'd probably learned to be invisible his whole life, trying not to cause more trouble than he'd already caused. A waiter hurried over to Dean's manager, Herman Citron, who was standing in the wings. Herman scribbled something on a cocktail napkin and sent it to the stage. Ken Lane caught it during the next musical break. He glanced at it, then passed it to Dean. The note said, "Finish the show. Don't make trouble." Dean looked at the note. Then he looked at Willie Hayes, almost at the exit now. Then he looked out at the audience. 2,400 people who had no idea what was happening, who didn't see Willie, who never saw people like Willie, who came to Vegas to be entertained and never thought about what that entertainment cost, who paid for it, what had to happen behind the scenes to make their night perfect. Dean thought about Sammy, about conversations they'd had late at night when the clubs were closed and the cameras were off, about dignity, about what it cost to stay silent, about how many times Dean had watched this exact scene play out and said nothing, how many times he'd told himself it wasn't his problem, it wasn't his fight, he had to think about his career, how many times he'd chosen comfort over courage. Ken Lane saw Dean's expression change. He'd played piano for Dean for 5 years. He knew that look. He leaned closer, still playing, keeping the music going. "Dean, whatever you're thinking, don't..." But Dean was done thinking. He stopped singing mid-word. The band continued for 2 more bars before dying into confused silence. The trumpet player looked at the drummer. The drummer looked at Ken. Ken looked at Dean. And Dean walked to the front of the stage. The Copa room went quiet, not gradually, all at once. 2,400 people stopped talking, stopped drinking, stopped moving. They stared at the stage where Dean Martin stood in silence, microphone hanging at his side. Dean walked to the very front of the stage. His movements were deliberate, controlled. He looked toward the back of the room where Willie Hayes was being escorted toward the exit. The security guards had stopped moving. They could feel it, the attention of the entire room shifting toward them. Someone in the audience coughed. It sounded like a gunshot in the silence. Herman Citron stood in the wings, his face pale. He couldn't stop Dean, not without making the situation worse. The casino manager appeared beside him, whispering urgently, "Get him back on track. Now." But Dean wasn't getting back on track. He raised the microphone slowly. His voice carried through the room with perfect clarity. "Folks, we have a situation here," the audience murmured. A woman near the front leaned toward her husband. "Is he sick? What's wrong?" Dean ignored the questions. He was looking at Willie Hayes. The old man had stopped walking. The guards still had him by the arms, but they weren't moving anymore. Everyone was frozen, waiting. "I want to tell you about someone," Dean said. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. 2,400 people waited to hear what Dean Martin would say next. "That gentleman being escorted out," Dean said, pointing toward Willie Hayes. "His name is Willie Hayes. He played piano at this hotel when the Sands first opened in 1952, before most of you ever heard of Las Vegas, before the Rat Pack, before Dean Martin was playing sold-out show. W.S. in this room." Willie looked up, surprised. The guard's hands tightened on his arms. Dean continued. "Mr. Hayes also served in the army, fought in World War II, Italy, came home and helped build the entertainment scene that made this city what it is. The audience was silent. Some people were starting to understand. Others were still confused, wondering where this was going. "He came here tonight just to see the old place again," Dean said. His voice was calm, matter of fact, "and he's being asked to leave. I want to know why." The casino manager stepped forward from the wings. "Mr. Martin, we can discuss this after the show." Dean didn't look at him. "No, we're going to discuss it now." He looked back at Willie Hayes, at the two guards holding his arms, at the entire room watching. And then Dean Martin said the words that could have ended his career. "I don't perform in places that treat people this way." He started walking off stage. The room erupted. Gasps, murmurs, confusion rippling through the crowd. Herman was frantically waving at the casino manager. The manager looked at the audience, at Dean, at Willie Hayes. He was doing the math fast. A room full of people who'd paid top dollar to see Dean Martin. A star who was about to walk out. A situation spiraling out of control. "Wait," the manager said. His voice was tight. "Mr. Hayes can stay. We apologize for the misunderstanding." Dean stopped. He turned around slowly. "Thank you." He walked back to center stage, picked up the microphone, smiled at the audience like nothing had happened. "Now, where were we?" The applause started. Not scattered, not polite. A wave of it, building. They weren't clapping for the music. They were clapping for what had just happened, for what they'd witnessed. After the show, Dean found Willie Hayes sitting on a crate near the loading dock. He was alone. The guards were gone. Dean sat down beside him. "You okay?" Willie nodded. "I appreciate what you did, Mr. Martin. But you didn't have to do that. I didn't want to cause problems." "You didn't cause problems," Dean said. "And call me Dean." He lit a cigarette. "You shouldn't have to be grateful for basic respect." They sat in silence for a moment. Willie looked at his hands. "I played with Count Basie's band, 1948 to 1951. Best years of my life. When the Sands opened in 52, they hired me for the house band. Paid well, too. For a while, what happened? New management came in. 1954. They wanted a different image." Willie smiled, but there was no humor in it. "So they let me go. I understood. That's how it works." Dean shook his head. "That's not how it should work." "Maybe not," Willie said. "But you said something tonight. That's what matters." Herman appeared in the doorway. "Dean, the casino manager wants to talk." Dean stood up. "Tell him Willie Hayes has a lifetime pass to any show I perform at the Sands. Front row seat if he wants it." He looked at Herman. "And if they have a problem with that, they can find a new headliner." Herman nodded and left. Willie stood, extended his hand. "Thank you, Dean." Dean shook it. "I should have done this years ago." By the next morning, everyone in Las Vegas knew what had happened at the Sands. The story spread through the entertainment community like wildfire. Performers talked about it backstage. Dealers whispered about it between shifts. Cocktail waitresses discussed it in break rooms. Some people were inspired. Some casino owners were furious. The question everyone asked was, did anything actually change? Not overnight, not dramatically. But small shifts happened. The Sands quietly relaxed some of its backstage access policies. Other hotels noticed. Within 6 months, a few venues began allowing black patrons in areas that had been off-limits before. Not because they suddenly became enlightened, not because they wanted to, because they had to stay competitive, because Dean Martin had shown there was a cost to the old system. Willie Hayes got a job as a piano instructor at a music school on the West Side. Dean made sure he had tickets to every show at the Sands for the rest of his life. Willie used most of them, always sat in the front row, right where Dean could see him. Dean continued performing in Vegas for another 15 years, but he used his leverage differently after that night. Small acts of defiance, quiet insistence on treating people with dignity. Nothing that made headlines, everything that mattered to the people involved. Years later, when someone asked Dean about September 12, 1962, he shrugged it off. "I just stopped a show. Anyone could have done it." But Sammy Davis Jr. had a different perspective. He was quoted as saying, "Dean didn't just stop a show that night. He stopped pretending he didn't see what was happening. That takes more courage than people realize." That night didn't change Las Vegas overnight. The Civil Rights Act was still 2 years away. Real systemic change would take time, legislation, and the courage of countless people fighting for justice. But it changed Dean Martin. And for Willie Hayes, sitting in the front row watching his friend perform, it changed everything.